One of the things that we wanted to make sure is as you walk out this door is not to leave you, okay, you got the template, you know, go forth and do good. Because we all know that yes, you do have a template and a lot of it's done for you, but when we talk about really creating effective jurisdictional plans, it's really a much more complex, much more involved, much lengthier process. I will tell you that an annex like this, to do a really good job, normally would take between, depending on the size of your jurisdiction, would normally be a 3 to 6 month process. And what I mean by that is that's from the beginning of pulling out the plan, sending it out for review, scheduling your meetings, you know, and going through some steps that I'm going to cover with you. So the good news is that we've really shortened this process with you, and as I'm going to go through the information on the pre-workshop guidance, you're going to see that we've eliminated a number of steps for you. The PowerPoint, I'm not going to use it anymore. That was a slide that the DMACs wanted to make sure that you saw on that as we move forward. And then one of the things to remember is your disaster management area coordinators, a vital resource for you. And so we've put their contact information. I'm sure all of you have it. But as you go through the months ahead, they are available as a resource for you. And so if you have questions or you need further information or guidance, they are available for you. So that's their contact information. So from this point on, I already did the questions, so we're going to go into post-workshop next steps. And one of the areas that I had mentioned at the very beginning, we did those brief slides on strategic plans, levels of plans, etc., and I had that CPG 101 reference down at the bottom of the slide. Comprehensive Preparedness Guidance 101 is, like I said, it's the resource manual on how to write plans. It's really almost a procedural approach to, if I am the person and I've drawn the short straw to actually develop our jurisdictional plan, how do I move forward to do that? And so CPG 101 is a great document to just follow along. And actually the first few sections talk about plans. It gives you some suggested template formats. It identifies what type of your emergency operations plan and what type of recommended annexes you have. So my suggestion is you pull that document down and you save it, and you really get a chance to review it and take a look at it. But the section that we're really going to focus in on is the planning process. Okay, I want to develop a plan. How do I approach that? So one of the things as we start out, I identified that POETI, that plan, organize, equip, train, and exercise. And so this guidance that we're going to give you is actually going to kind of give you some breadcrumbs to follow in the few months ahead. That if you follow this and you complete out the steps that are remaining, and you finally go to approve the plan, you're gonna have a good plan. You should be able to, with a little bit of effort and following the steps that we're going to recommend, you should be able to wrap this plan up in the next 2 months, depending on your formal approval process. And the reason I say depending on your formal approval process is if you have a board or a commission that has to approve the plan, and they only meet every so often, you're going to have to strategically look ahead in the months, the next couple months, and determine, okay, if I do my meetings and my review and my updates, how soon could I actually anticipate that once the final draft is done, that I could get it through that formal process. And so that's going to be a factor in determining how quickly you can put this plan together. I do want to kind of tell you, even though I believe I write good plans, I have a little bit of experience, is that this plan is, when you finish the steps that we're going to recommend, it's going to be a good plan. But as you move forward over the next couple years, you have an opportunity to continue and improve it. Okay, is this the best plan out there? Maybe not. I mean, you can go out and research. That's usually what good planners do. You have another 2 years to go out there and go online and pull up mass care and shelter annexes from around the nation. There's a lot of them that are online. And you can start to pull things that you saw and you liked. That's what I did for this template. I had a great, I had a great advantage that I had come from a jurisdiction that we'd gone through litigation. We had to update our plans. A lot of what I'm passing on to you is what we learned. So our formatting for our city plans actually was a useful best practice, but I actually went and pulled some other care and shelter annexes from around the nation, and I found a lot of great things. That executive summary page was actually I found from another jurisdiction. I thought that was a great idea. By the way, the table of contents I didn't mean to mention this. The table of contents, that little insert that's on the executive summary, you need to change those pages also. Okay, so when you change your formal table of contents at the beginning of the plan, don't forget to go and change that little embedded table of contents on your executive summary. And the reason I put the reason I like that table of contents on the executive summary is it's a one document. You hand them that document. If they want to go and find more information, they can take that table of contents and go and then go and pull out the larger plan. So you don't have to really overwhelm them with the 40 to 50 to 60 page plan on their desk. If they want to read the whole plan, that's fine. If they don't, you just can give them an executive summary and it's got the table of contents, okay? So the first step before we actually go into this formal CPG planning process is, and I know I mentioned it at the very beginning, is getting your executive support. Because what you're going to need to do moving out of this workshop is you now have to open this up to a much wider participation. We've already identified numerous city departments that may be involved in your care and shelter operations. We've identified county departments. We've identified outside organizations. We've identified American Red Cross. We've even identified some contracted services that you have that are supporting your city. So when you leave this workshop, there's going to be a need to bring in other people. When you sit down and you do the briefing, and you want to schedule that as soon as you can when you move out of here, and I don't know what relationship you have, I can tell you that I did not have the span of control to call up Mayor Garcetti and say, you know what, I want to sit down with you and talk about the care and shelter annex and just go over it. I never even came close to Mayor Garcetti. So if you don't have that luxury, you're going to have to find somebody that is going to be able to do that briefing with your top executive. Because what we did have, and it was done through my general manager, is Mayor Garcetti, we drafted a memo saying that, for example, the care and shelter annex is due for review. We are requiring all participation of all city departments. Please be advised that this person will be contacting you within the next couple weeks, and you will need to participate. Okay. So what does a memo like that do for you? I will tell you that you'll most likely, there are going to be a few departments that still don't participate. Typically it was our city attorneys, a city attorney department would not participate, and our city administrative officer would rarely show up for our planning meetings, but most of the departments showed up. If we didn't have that memo and I wasn't identified as the lead planner that could email everybody and say, we have a meeting this Friday at 2 o'clock, highly unlikely I would get the participation of a lot of those departments where I had a good relationship with the emergency manager, but there would be a good portion of the departments that I would not see them at my planning meeting, and I needed them there. So when you actually get that executive support, it's critical. But the thing is before you start the planning process, if you can, schedule a meeting or get your highest fire authority to meet with whoever that executive level is. Present your annex development steps. You've already got a PowerPoint. You've got an executive summary page, so you can actually use that. Confirm their support, and then ask if they would be willing to sign a memo to be distributed to everybody that's going to participate and to support you. And that will be a tremendous plus as you move forward to follow through these steps. And so I highly recommended that. Okay. So another thing is you're moving through these steps, you have to consider you're drafting a fairly new annex. Is this annex going to probably impact some existing policies? And so you may need to have somebody in one of your departments go through some policies, most likely the city manager's office, or if you have a finance and admin division or department that really deals with policy, have them pull it out and make sure that there's nothing in conflict in the policies. Your policies may need to be updated also. So those are some two recommended tips. So when we look at the, down at the bottom of this page, this diagram, how many people have taken the CSTI planning course? Okay, anybody recognize this diagram down here, the 6 steps? So the 6 steps that you have listed down here, if we were starting from scratch today and we were going to develop a plan, these are the recommended steps to move forward to develop a jurisdictional plan. So there's a couple steps that we've already done, so we're going to be able to skip over those steps, but the one step that you're going to have to backtrack now and do is, if you look at this step 1, form a collaborative planning team. This is one step. As you move out of this, you're going to get executive support, is you're going to need to sit down and now you're going to need to list out this stakeholder group. And these are going to be the people that are going to be in your planning group as you move forward to kind of close out this. I consider the template, if you make all those inserts, the corrections for the inserts, you add the language, I consider that you now have a good rough draft plan. And I'll kind of describe what I mean by that. So if you come out of this workshop, you fill in all of those insert brackets, you get some of the information that needs to still be filled in, you're going to have a good rough draft, okay? And I'm going to tell you what that rough draft will be for you. So when we form a collaborative team, is you really want to look at, okay, who are the key stakeholders that I really do need to have at the table through this whole planning process. And if you think of them, they're probably pretty self-explanatory. You're definitely going to need emergency management, fire, police, American Red Cross. We actually have a couple, if you have an animal services, it's always a good idea if the city manager or the mayor's office will provide a representative, eyes on, because then you aren't having to go back periodically and do a briefing to that lead executive. If you can't, your recreation and parks or whatever department has the responsibility for care and shelter definitely is part of your core planning team. If you can get with county public health and have them participate, that's always a good idea. And then if you have that position or a department that is really has the oversight of ADA compliance or any issues for people with disabilities and access and function needs, you need to have them on your core planning team also. This core planning team really is that team that moves through all the steps with you. So they're the ones that are always going to be attending the meetings. They're the ones, a lot of them have those primary key responsibilities I identified. But you may have sections of the plan that you want to bring in additional stakeholders. So let's say that you want to include some NGOs for staffing support at the shelters. So when you get to the section of the plan that talks about staffing responsibilities, for that meeting, you may want to pull in some additional stakeholders to come in just for that meeting, but you didn't really need them there for every meeting. And so that's going to be kind of something that you're going to flesh out when you leave this workshop, is who's your core planners and who are those stakeholders that they do need to be part of the process at some point, or even they need to get a copy of the plan, even if you aren't including them in planning meetings. So you're kind of going to have 3 groups. You're going to have that core planning team, you're going to have those additional stakeholders that maybe you're bringing in for some meetings, but not all. Maybe they have an assignment of a certain section. And then you're going to have those stakeholders that even if they aren't on your planning team, they're going to get a copy. They need to have the plan and they need to see the plan. Okay, so that's the first task when you leave here that you guys are going to go ahead and complete out. The one thing that you want to do for the planning team, and it's like anything that we do in our daily jobs, is you have to think of their workload. So even though you're going to try to do this on a very short timeline, as you're sitting down and identifying this list of stakeholders and you're dividing them out, try to project manage out your first couple meetings. So at least you can get some dates set up, because if you're going to be calling these meetings within the next month, which I'm imagining most of you want to get on the fast track with this plan, is you want to go ahead and give them a heads up that you're moving forward. And even before you get that memo out, you can just do a courtesy email. Hey, we're looking at updating or developing our jurisdiction mass care and shelter annex. We're looking at some tentative dates in September. please, kind of keep, give them 4 or 5 dates. Then get with that executive, hone it down to at least 2 good dates, and then send that back out. But you can start advertising, start marketing your initiative right now. Okay, you might want to, in that email, include a little bit expectations. When you come, you'll be expected to review the plan. You might be asked to fill in some areas that need further development, depending on if they fall into your area of responsibility. But you're definitely going to need to review your roles and responsibilities and confirm that these ones are ones that you can support. And when you hit that challenge, you're going to have some departments that are going to say, I don't do that. You have it listed for me, but I don't do that. And here's the challenge that you're going to have as a planner. It may be true that that's not a responsibility that they can overtake, that they can take on, and you'll have to look someplace else in your organization for your city to assign it. But you could have a department that just doesn't feel like they want to do it. And so you're going to have to kind of take a look at those bulleted items under the roles and responsibilities and be very clear from your leadership perspective that, okay, you may think you don't do it, but actually within our city jurisdiction, it is something that will need to fall. And then that's more work that you'll have to do with that engagement. But there'll be a little bit, that challenge could come up, and we just want to make you aware of that you'll have some departments that they'll say, no, it's actually not our responsibility, it's theirs. So you'll learn a lot. But you may have a department that says it's not their responsibility and it actually is. And we actually did have both. So are you going to pull up the document? I wasn't going to scroll through it, but. Oh, okay, cool, good. And then obviously, if you're going to send out a meeting notice, it's sometimes good if you're going to do a formal, like a document out, if the executive signs that meeting notice, that also actually adds some clout to it. And then the reason I told you to pick a couple, after that first meeting, you obviously want to get this plan up and running, so you may set that first meeting. But once you get into that first meeting, kind of let the group collectively set the next meeting. But when you walk out of any meeting, already have your next meeting scheduled. I highly recommend that, and that comes from my experience as a planner. Have the group, the last item of business on the meeting is you set the next meeting date. And then you'll find that it's a lot more effective rather than waiting, emailing out, okay, what dates are, oh great, okay. So what dates work and what dates don't. Ooh, you know what, that image didn't, weird, okay. So this first step in CPG 101 is that stakeholder assessment. Even though you may want to develop this plan, take at least a week to look at your stakeholder group, because really the value of this plan and how useful and how effective it is getting that participation and input from everybody that really has a place and a role in this. So sometimes if you try to go too fast and you leave you can always bring somebody in halfway through, but just taking a couple days extra to really hone and really solidify that stakeholder group will save you some grief on the back end trying to pull somebody in halfway through and get them up to speed. So taking a little bit of extra time, it's like any project, taking a little bit of extra time on the front end can save you some grief at the back end. So that's step 1. Step 2, and I'm going to kind of review these because I'm imagining that if you've been assigned this plan, you're going to be assigned other plans. So you don't have to really make a lot of notes on this because you're going to eventually, you're going to probably pick up CPG 101. But if we were starting this from scratch, our next step would be understanding the situation. Because before we draft, we've got our stakeholder group, we got our team, now we're going to move forward, we're going to draft a plan, but before we do that, we go back and we do that risk analysis step. Because that risk analysis really allows us to understand the situation. What kind of situations would a mass care and shelter plan be implemented? What might we expect to see a care and shelter activation? Be activated in your jurisdiction. And so and normally when we do a plan, we go back and we do that threat hazard risk analysis. How many people have participated in the threat hazard identification risk analysis process, the thyra process? Painful. Painful. The only thing is that actually the federal level is moving towards strengthening, solidifying that requirement to do a thyra. So you have an opportunity, if you've never gone through a thyra process and you have a jurisdiction that you know very well, or even the DMACs, if somebody's going through it, ask if you can come and attend. They tend to be kind of restricted because sometimes the information they're sharing are their vulnerabilities, but usually in the emergency management world, we all understand that you need the network. So if you know a jurisdiction that's going through a thyra assessment, see if you can go ahead and participate. It's really not that complicated. If you take the CSTI planning course, because I actually am an instructor for that, I actually teach the thyra module, and we feel that we do a pretty good job of simplifying it for you. But when you see it with the spreadsheet, it looks very complicated, but it's really not, but it is painful. Normally what would happen is your jurisdiction, and you always do this threat hazard for the local hazard mitigation plan. Those people that are assigned the LHMP are maybe somewhat familiar, and definitely for grants, they're moving towards a thyra. It will be required for grant applications, if it isn't already, because I haven't been involved in that grant process for a year or so here. So just getting familiar with that. And there's actually guidance, CPG, is it 201? CPG 201 is the thyra. There's actually a manual that FEMA provides that goes over the thyra process. So, but it'll put you to sleep on a Friday night if you try to read it. So, but you pick that up and it goes through the whole process. Okay. So the good news is for this template, you don't need to do it, because guess what? We already identified all risks and hazards that apply to this plan can be found in what? We cross-referenced it. Where do they need to go? Because you need to, at least if somebody asks you the question, where do I go to find the risks that are identified with this plan? Emergency operations plan, and if you have it, local hazard mitigation plan, good. But you don't have to do this step because we've already done it. So this annex, the language in there already addresses understanding the situation. But if you were starting another annex from scratch, you'd want to go to that risk analysis process. Determining the goals and objectives of your planning group. Well, guess what? You've passed that step already too. Because if you were pulling together a stakeholder group to develop a care and shelter annex, the 3 goals that I gave you for this plan, the purpose of that plan, that would be the objectives and goals of your planning team. But this is what I would recommend to you. Because when we talk about teamwork, it's always about the engagement, and that's really going to be your biggest challenge, is engaging this team that you want to really give you good input and really support your plan. Is what I would do is I would put up the goals for their review and ask them if they concur with the goals of the plan, and then if they want to add any. If they give you any additional goals and they look like, they're not really like crazy goals, well, we want to include McDonald's at all feeding sites, as a goal. I take that, that's really simple. You're not going to put that in. But if you can use it in your plan, write it into your plan. Why do we do that? Why do we write that input into our plans? And this is kind of critical. If you're going to move forward and you're going to be a planner, it really goes back to human nature. When we feel we've invested input and we've actually had a part in the plan, we're more likely to accept it. And so if you have people that are giving you good feedback and you can write it into the plan, that engages your planning team. It actually builds up their capability too, because they're going to be the same planners that are going to show up for your public information annex and your EOP and your evacuation annex. So you're actually building planning capability in your planning team, and it just strengthens you, and it takes some of the weight off of you for the future. So you're not doing as much work, because eventually they're going to give you the goals. When you walk into a planning team, you're not going to have to write out goals. They'll give you the goals and you just write them down. And that's how making your job easier. So determine goals and objectives, but that's already done. Guess what? The plan development step. We did most of that already because you already have existing language, you have a template. The only thing that's remaining in this plan development is now what you're going to do is you've identified your stakeholders. Before you have your first meeting, you're going to email out, once you've made all the inserts, all the corrections that you can do on your own, sitting in your cubicle by yourself, you're going to make all those corrections. You're going to send out, you're going to distribute out this rough draft to all of your core planning team. If you want to send it out to your other participating stakeholders ahead of time, That's a good idea too. It just gives them more time to review and look through the plan. But you definitely, your core planning team, you want to send out that rough draft. And you want to send it out, if you can, about no less than a week before. I will tell you that the thing is I always said, oh, I want to give people as much time as I possibly can. But I will tell you, I used to send it out a month ahead of time. 99% of the time, people would review it the week before the meeting. So minimum a week, but if you can give them longer, that's okay. But you definitely want to send the plan out for review, tell them they need to read through it, because when you come into that first meeting, you're really going to start working. You're going to start going into, just like I did with you and I ran through the sections, you already have a PowerPoint that you can use to facilitate that first meeting. You're going to sit down, you're going to go over the goals, you're going to go over how this development process is going to go. You could actually use the 6-step process and put it up on the screen from CPG 101 and say, okay, this is what we're running through. These are the steps already have been accomplished, and these are my expectations. You could actually start in that first meeting, because we've actually done a lot of steps for you. You could actually start to review some of your first initial sections. Like section 1, you could go through purpose, scope, assumptions, and situation. You could go through that. You might even be able to get into, you'll be able to get through the introduction, the executive summary, and then your purpose, scope, situation, and assumptions, that first meeting. Okay? And then maybe your second meeting you devote completely to the concept of operations, because that's a pretty meaty section. And then maybe your third meeting, and you can do these meetings like once a week or once every 2 weeks, because you can get everybody on a meeting cycle. And then do your roles and responsibilities that third meeting, and then wrap it all up on the fourth meeting. And then what you've done is you're actually going through the sections, you're having them review it. If it's quick input, you put a scribe in the back of the room on a laptop with that draft. And as people are giving the inputs, you can have somebody scribing it. Or what you could do is as they leave the meeting, you tell them, which is a little bit more, it's labor intensive, but have them have them take the electronic copy, do a track changes, and send you the track changes back. And then you review their recommendations and what you concur and you agree. Because remember, you're the lead planner. What goes into this plan, unless you're overridden by somebody at an executive level, what goes in this plan is your decision, because you're the lead planner. So if you feel that the input, and for whatever reason, isn't going to hold up under scrutiny, then you're going to make that decision to include it. If you have somebody scribe during the meeting, be sure that they're scribing any input in red, because you're not just going to automatically accept it. You're going to, at the end of the meeting, you're going to go ahead and you're going to distribute out that copy with the red inserted input, and everybody's going to get a chance to review it. They might make comments on that added red sections or that verbiage and language, and then you as the lead planner is going to get that back, and you're going to make that final determination. And then when you move into the next meeting, you're going to send out an updated copy, if you can. So there's a little bit of intense work at the beginning, because you're kind of doing that fast turnaround. But right now, you should be able to pull somebody to do just inserting information, because the template, I mean, you could take somebody in your office, a management analyst position or something like that, an intern. If you have an intern, interns are always great, because they're really excited and they want experience and they want to know how to write plans, because you're at that point where this plan is pretty much done, and the input that you're getting from people is just straight, just type it out on the plan. So this is really an easy point where you can step back from the plan and let somebody else be doing it on the laptop, and you're just facilitating and making sure that they capture that input. Okay? And then that person can clean it all up, and then they email it to you, and then you distribute it out with your meeting invitation for the next meeting. Okay, but that plan development, you still have a little bit of work left to do. Once you go through all the sections and you've gotten the input, that last meeting, you're going to send that final draft out, that rough draft out for a final review. You have a week, no more than a week, to provide input and comments to the plan, and you give them a date that you want that plan turned around. Once they give you input and you update that plan, that is your final draft. Okay, so that final draft is now ready, and you're going to turn around, you're going to send that final draft out for a quick review. That final draft is the one that's now going to go up through your formal approval process, because you've already gone through the plan development with your stakeholders. Okay, does that make sense? So you got a little bit of work on identifying the stakeholder, that step one, and then the plan development. You're going to need to do those meetings where you're just reviewing the sections, what you already have written, and then you're just going to go ahead and you're going to come out of that with some kind of a final draft. Step 4 and step 5 are kind of you can condense these all at the same time. Usually it's a little bit more of the fine-tuning of the plan. And step 5 is plan preparation, review, and approval. What you want to do, and this actually, if you want to copy and paste this information here, if you look down on page 4, review of the plan. There's some qualifiers or parameters that when you have people review the plan, and they may not be really good at it the first time they review a plan, but they will get better and better. There's actually some qualifiers that you say, hey, when you're looking at the plan, we've already caught all the corrections, we've already caught all the grammar. Can you take a look at the adequacy, feasibility, acceptability, completeness, okay? And we've actually defined what that means. So adequacy, a plan is adequate if the scope and the concept of planned operations identify and address critical tasks. So if I'm the Rec and Parks Department and I review the concept of operations and I review the scope and I see that all my critical tasks are in there, that plan passes the adequacy qualifier. So except completeness, a plan is completed, it incorporates all tasks to be accomplished, includes all required capabilities, etc. I will tell you, the first time your planners go through and try to review and assess a plan, they're going to be a little bit challenged with this. But if you keep doing it, applying their capability to recognize what's a good plan and what isn't, you're going to build their planning capability and you're going to strengthen your plans in your jurisdiction. These qualifiers were taken right out of the CPG 101 guidance document, so that's where we got those. So you've got the plan development, plan preparation, we've kind of condensed it to 3 to 4 meetings. You're moving into that formal approval process. Usually what happens, however your formal approval process is all of your planning group and your stakeholders have seen the final draft. You're going to have to brief your executives or that board, whoever the board is, on your final draft. And again, you can use the PowerPoint, right? And you can just give them a brief summary of what's included in the plan. You want to make sure that you email out the final draft to them. They may or may not read it. It'll be up to them. But you at least want to make sure that they get that a week in advance so you can at least say that you did receive the plan. But you're also going to be doing that briefing to them on that step. When we talk about approval of the plan, once that final draft has been reviewed through that officiating person or the board or whatever, then you're going to move it through that official approval process. And that's that process where it gets sent out to whoever the approving board, group, commission, team, person, whatever that is. You're going to send it to them. They're going to review it, and they have to formally say, yes, I approve this. It goes, and usually it's your city executive that's that first level. At least they get to take a look at it. Then if it has to go through a formal, like a board or a council or a commission, you're going to move it through that process. Once they approve it and they ratify it, that's when that signature goes on that plan certification page. Once you receive the ratification and the formal adoption and that plan is considered promulgated, then you're going to go ahead, you're going to PDF it, and you're not going to take all the draft, be sure, because I have seen jurisdictional plans with drafts still on them. Taking anything away that says draft, final draft, take it off the plan. And you're now going to distribute it out to your planning group, your other level of stakeholders, and then anybody else on a need-to-know basis. If you post your plans to the public, and a lot of jurisdictions do, and I don't know if you know it, but under the Brown Act, the public can ask for our jurisdictional plans. You probably want to right away, as soon as you've got an approved plan, is go through your plan and do a redact copy. Redact means you're just going through and you're taking a black highlighter and you're black highlighting over any of those things that you don't want the public to know. Okay, because if you're going to give it out to the public, there's some things that you don't want the public to have access to. So right away I can think of one thing that we would not want the public to have, that we've actually given a phone number in this care and shelter annex. We don't want the public to have the American Red Cross 24/7 hotline number, right? So right away, as soon as I come out of that as the lead planner, I'm going to take a copy of the plan, I'm going to go through and I'm going to do a good job of redacting those things that are sensitive, or I don't contact phone numbers. If you have a contact list at the back of the plan as an attachment, you don't want people's phone numbers, you don't want their email addresses. You're going to need to redact that out and have a redacted copy ready, because you may get a request of sharing of plans under the Brown Act. Yeah, Mike, go ahead.
And for those of you that go out there and search for other people's plans, the internet is filled with other department and other jurisdictions' plans unredacted.
Yeah.
You can find people's cell phone numbers and email addresses for jurisdictions that would surprise you. So do yourself a favor, and the people you work with, if you post it on your website, which you might have to do depending on your jurisdiction, be very careful redacting it. Anything that's contact information, you are fully within your legal rights, and to keep friendships and relationships, to redact it. Because if those phones start ringing and people say, how did you get this number? And they hear it was on the plan, you need to go into witness relocation.
So a good approach to all your plans is if you just put for official use only, FOUO, at the bottom of your plans, it covers you somewhat, okay, but we're still subject to the Brown Act. So it's just it's a good idea to plan that you may get a request for it, but there are certain plans that absolutely the public is not going to get, even if they request it. If you think of things like a cyber annex, we're not going to provide a cyber annex to make it a public document. A terrorism annex, CBRNE, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear annex, because those type of plans give a window into very critical operations and sensitive information. But things like mass care and shelter, evacuation, those plans, it would be very difficult to argue that you couldn't provide at least most of the plan, because it's very general and the public does need to know, some aspects of our sheltering. So there's plans that you just need to be prepared that you might have to share, but just putting that FUOU at the bottom of all your plans is actually a good approach, and it does protect you somewhat on that. So step 6 is that plan implementation. That's where the plan's been adopted and approved, and now we're actually ready to go ahead and implement it. We're actually going to close out this workshop, and we're going to talk to you about some real life events that have just happened, which really points to the urgency that all you have to really take a look and see if you can get this plan wrapped up. But when we talk about plan implementation, it's really now you're going to go ahead and you may have an incident that happens in your jurisdiction, and when you activate your care and shelter sites, they should be following this plan. But when we talk about the maintenance, we need to really talk about training also. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give American Red Cross a chance to really briefly share, because you've actually got 2 levels of training, which are really great. So do you want to share that training that you offer?
Yeah, one of the trainings that you could request is the shelter fundamentals training. It includes, it's about a 3.5, 4-hour class. And your disaster service workers typically are there. Sometimes your partners, like CERT, will be there. Other people who need key information take the class. It gives you all the fundamentals of actually opening up a shelter, things like that. And then it's followed by a short simulation where you actually open up some cots and move some tables and chairs, so that when you walk away, you have some concept of what it is that we are trying to open when we open a shelter. The next level of training would be to request the shelter management class, and those would be not for the people that'll just generally be helping your shelter, but who are the key people that will be making the decisions about how you want to operate this facility. I think I did, the 3 different kinds of shelters, either all Red Cross or all independent. Again, usually those are faith-based. Where they make their own decisions, their own supplies, their own money, their own people. Red Cross, we do it all. or the partnership, and that's what we are mostly doing is the partnership. We have additional classes in how to set up a feeding operation, things like psychological first aid to help your people work with people who are under trauma and duress. We have access to partnerships, so as you're doing your plan, know that if we're your partner, that additional partners come to play. Salvation Army, Tzu Chi, different recovery things. So it's a much bigger picture. It's a much bigger umbrella that we have and that we can offer to you. In addition to the training, I noticed that some of the things, there were a couple pages towards the back that talked about if you were going to stock some of your own supplies, we have templates that you can use or you can customize a little bit. What forms do you need? If you actually wanted a hard copy of each form, which I recommend because electricity doesn't always work for in the beginning of a big disaster, just have a copy of all of the forms that you might need, and you may be using a yellow form to transfer that information, but at least you know what the critical information is. What would be the basics of a administrative kit? So it's like office in a baggie, and we need make sure we got the yellow tape, we make sure we've got the signage and things like that. We have those templates. There's new doctrine that has just come out about how do you manage the supplies that people drop off. That donations from the community can be a total nightmare. Think of a garage sale that goes on endlessly in your front driveway and it rains. So you don't want that. There are ways to manage that. That's an evolving situation and we're just starting to get a handle on it. You can have access to that handle also. Yep.
You forgot to mention, you're not home when it starts. That was, the garage sale, it starts when you're not there.
Yeah, you come outside of the shelter you've been running, and there's all this stuff in the parking lot that people just dropped off, and you do not want to be surprised by that. So we have occasionally been surprised by it. Or the llama that's tied to the tree. What do you do there? All those things are things that we try and think ahead, have an idea, and then adjust when it comes in. You have access to all of that. So we're happy to work with you and provide some of those things. You're going to be talking to Andrea again. Got quite a few business cards, but any other ones I can pass on. And again, if you kind of work with your neighboring cities, and we'll do trainings that can reach more of you, a bigger impact on your mutual aid cities, that's a good way to go.
So exercises, we talked a little bit about how do you exercise your plan. You can start out with that seminar where you're just building awareness. And I'm going to wrap up through the remainder of these sections real quick because I want to try and get you out of here a little early. So tabletop is a good way once you have that final draft and you've approved and you have approval, you've approved, I'm sorry. Once you have that promulgated copy and that plan has been adopted and approved, a good idea is in maybe a month or so, is go ahead and schedule a tabletop to kind of exercise through the plan. That's a good way for your departments to kind of get familiar with the plan and what's in it. And you just do a rotation of, you provide them a artificial scenario and they can talk their way through the roles and responsibilities and what would happen if they activate a shelter. So, and then you could do a functional, which is where you're notionalizing a scenario, but you're actually going through a lot more activity when you're doing the exercise. And I'm not going to go into exercises. You can go on and pull up the HSEAP program, and I gave you the acronym, and you can go ahead and go through it. And then the full scale, obviously, is where you may go out and practice opening up a shelter facility, where you actually take the kits out there and you run through it. Reviewing, revising, and maintaining the plan. This is really just an expanded information. I covered it a little bit. This really jumps off of that information that I had on the record of changes, is when do you decide to go ahead and do a plan review. Public information and communications is a huge area. We don't go into it as a next step, but this is what I would heartily recommend, is you contact your public information officer or officers for your city, and you develop some public information messaging around sheltering. You can actually establish pre-canned messages. There's a lot of jurisdictions that already have these messages written up. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. So reach out there and contact some of your neighbors and say, hey, do you have any pre-canned messages that when we activate a shelter, this is the message that you send out to the public for that warning or that notification. So you want to develop a whole public information communication strategy around care and shelter. And that strategy really kind of involves evacuations also. Not going to go into resource management. I did give you the National Incident Management System resource management cycle on page 7. A lot of what we're talking about here now when we're talking about plans is in that preparedness piece. That's that one that's to the left of the incident. But we did give 6 recommendations if you want to strengthen your resource management process. These are some recommendations that you can move forward to, and they aren't necessarily tied to the drafting of the plan. You can do these next steps at a different time, make them strategic goals, whatever, but they will strengthen your care and shelter capability. And for example, the first one is solidify your city's DSW policy and program. So there's an example of one. So there's the whole recommended steps for resource management. We've kind of gone verbatim over memorandums of understanding. I think Dave did a really good job on that. We did list some people right out of the gate that would be good recommended. Note the note under schools that the use of schools as a site. The reason that we have to be really careful with schools is not just because their facilities may not be useful. It's also because of the perspective of children, the psychology of children when we talk about disasters. Children have a need that after a disaster, normalcy needs to come back as soon as possible. They aren't as resilient as we are. We think they are, but they aren't because they filter disaster information differently than we do. I'll share really briefly, they did a study on children that were very young during 9/11, and they were asked, what about this disaster? And they said, well, there were hundreds of planes that went into buildings. Now think about that. So no, there weren't, there were only 4, but how often did the news show that repeat of that video? And so for a child, they don't understand that that's a recorded message. All they see is plane after plane after plane after plane going into buildings. And so in their perspective, there are hundreds of planes went into buildings. And so we don't think the way they do. So getting them back to normalcy, and schools are such a representation of normalcy for children that we hesitate to use them even as a shelter, because if we use them as a shelter, we're preventing that return to normalcy as soon as possible. So that's just something to think about, is the psychology. Neighboring jurisdictions. I had a chance to talk with him during one of the breaks, and we talked about, you're all small jurisdictions. Why don't you get together and develop a shelter incident management team among 3 or 4 jurisdictions? Now granted, you're all, if he provides his personnel to me over in another city, he's paying for it. But what happens when he has a disaster and I go over? And that's the whole concept of mutual aid. So looking at your jurisdictional support, how can you help each other? And I can tell you the City of Los Angeles has mutual aid agreements with Burbank and the local jurisdictions on response between LAPD, LAFD, where they go and help each other out periodically. So that's a good thing to think about. And then finally, a step, and this will go after your plan's completed, but all these departments that you listed are going to really need to develop out those standard operating procedures, and those can be checklists or field operations guides, whatever. So hopefully, yeah, there is a little bit of work remaining to be done, but as far as this draft plan, it's really that stakeholder group, meeting, going ahead and wrapping up that plan, going for getting input, going through that formal review, and then approving the plan. I want to thank you really, you guys. Again, I'm going to reiterate how appreciative I am, and Diane and Dave can come up and close it out. But great job, you guys. This was a lot. It really is a lot today, and you were all troopers, and I'm so proud of you.